Who doesn't like tomatoes? I don't know if I've ever met someone that doesn't like a tomato. And if you haven't had a vine-picked ripe tomato, and if you only had tomatoes from the store, you don't know what you're missing. Tomatoes are probably the most intense vegetables when it comes to flavor, because in the supermarket they pick them while they're green and then ship them out, and they ripen in transit. But if you have a fresh tomato, it is a remarkable, and when you bite into a fresh tomato, it's almost a spiritual experience. We sometimes will just have tomato sandwiches. You just get like a big beef eater tomato, half-inch slice, put it between a couple of pieces of bread with some mayonnaise. You got a sandwich right there. But tomatoes are wonderful. The only problem I don't like about tomatoes at the end of season, when you got to pull the tomato cages up, and then you have to try to get all the branches and vines out from the cages. That's the only thing I don't like about tomatoes. But the tomatoes are coming on fast. I mean, right now everything is coming on fast. And what's really remarkable is we have very little blossom end rot. That's basically where the end of the tomato will have like a black spot here. And that's usually caused by infrequent watering. And we're kind of like in the middle of a drought right now. And we almost have to water every day. The last couple of days, in the last 3 days, we've had almost 5 inches of water. We've had more water in the last 4 days than we usually get in 4 months. So it really has done a number on the garden and also with weed production. But tomatoes are a great thing to freeze dry. The only problem with freeze drying tomatoes, when they come back, they don't come back very well. They always kind of tend to be mushy. So when we freeze dry tomatoes, we usually will do it in salsas or in spaghetti sauces, because nothing is like, and nothing will ever become back like a fresh tomato, even after it's freeze dried. It's just not the same, but it's still worth doing them. Cherry tomatoes, well, that's just not fair. Cherry tomatoes are, to me, they're almost addictive. If I am sent down to pick cherry tomatoes, I don't come back with very many, because they are just so good. It's almost like candy. I love cherry tomatoes. Great just to toss into salads. I mean, what's not to like about cherry tomato? One of the problems with cherry tomatoes, as in this plant that I'm picking right now, I did not plant it. Cherry tomatoes are notorious at self-seeding. I'm not sure what the term would be, but if you leave a cherry tomato out and one of these drops on the ground, and if you don't catch it, you're going to have cherry tomatoes next year, perhaps in with your potatoes or somewhere else, because they volunteer themselves very easily. But like I said, that's just more for me to eat. Before we start processing our tomatoes, we want to have a couple of sinks cleaned out to rinse and wash the tomatoes prior to smashing the tomatoes. Okay, once we have the tomatoes in here, of course we'll want to take off the stems. Just kind of give them a bit of a rinse, going from one basin to another. And this is a good time to inspect them for end rot and other little problems. Even though these have some rot areas, we can still cut the tomato off and save part of it. Now this tomato right here is really ripe. It's so ripe that it's actually split the casing open. Unless there's mold or other yucky stuff inside that, even these can be saved. But if you start seeing the white mold and rot that's around the tomato, then you might want to just put it to the side. So I'm going to think about this one. Sometimes with these light cracks on the tomatoes that don't go all the way into the meat or into the pulp, there's not a problem with those, but when they crack really bad, where you can actually see inside, the problem with this is these tomatoes, this is like blossom end rot, is bacteria has an opportunity to get into this tomato. So I'm going to use this tomato, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the majority of this off so that the area where the crack is exposed is going to be gone. Now this tomato is cracked and you can see the white kind of mold slime. This is one of those things that it just doesn't look appetizing, and it's just a small tomato, and instead of taking a chance, that's going to be discarded. And whether a tomato floats or sinks, that's really not a big issue. It just has to do with the amount of water content in the tomato and displacement. So if they sink or float, that's really not an issue. If you have a tomato that you're in question, you can smell it. If it smells like a tomato, you're okay. If it smells putrid, that is one you're going to want to pass on. See fruit flies around your tomatoes? The tomatoes may be on its way out. Fruit flies are kind of a normal thing, but if you do see a lot of fruit flies on your tomatoes, that's a sign that they may be past date. One thing we usually do when we bring up our tomatoes, if we don't put them immediately into a refrigerator, we'll usually put them into a cooler, because at this time of year we're getting so many tomatoes ripening on the vine, you run out of counter space and you run out of freezer or fridge space. And so we have a large cooler that we'll put our tomatoes in. A lot of times that will keep the fruit flies out of them. Now I really want to just worry about ripe tomatoes. If you have a green tomato, obviously you don't want to use it. Green tomatoes are not going to be a good thing. One thing about running it through the strainer, if you have sections of green tomatoes, then sometimes the green tomato section will plug up the strainer, and then taking that apart is a real hassle. A good rule to go with: when in doubt, throw it out. Depending on the size of the tomato, I will either half the tomato, or if they're really big, I will go ahead and quarter the tomato. One of the problems is the tomato has to be smaller than my little push stick here. And even with these small little tomatoes, if you don't cut these in half and you go to push them, well, then you have what's called tomato explosions. And usually if I don't do that, my counters will be covered with tomato pulp and seeds, because if you had the chance to push the tomatoes into the funnel, sometimes they explode and you get covered with tomato pulp. Some of these tomatoes are just really, really overripe, but they're still useful. This is like a Roma tomato, and you can see where it has a blossom end rot. In that case, you can just cut off the bad part, keep the good part. Tomatoes like this, you know, you can kind of go around and cut off the bad parts, but it gets to the point that maybe it's just not worth keeping the whole tomato. So on some of these, it's going to just be a judgment call on what you want to end up saving. This is the one that had like a really deep cut. You know, if you just cut deep enough, you can just keep on cutting until the bad parts of the tomato are gone. Yep, I just got splashed with an explosion. Yuck. See, this is what happens when you have tomato explosions. It ends up just going all over the place, including yourself. While you're grinding these tomatoes, if there's a point where this discharge material stops flowing into your container, there's a good chance that you may have a piece of green tomato back inside your little screw auger that may be green and plugging it up. If that plugs up here, it won't allow it to flow out there. So it's kind of a mess to do it, but you'll have to take all this apart to clear the auger out of any solid pieces. That's one of the reasons why you want to avoid the tomatoes that have a lot of green on them if they're not fully ripe. Now, I could stop at this point and just put this liquid into the freeze dryer and freeze dry this. I mean, it's getting pretty thick, but there's still a lot of water in this. And so what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to boil this down because it's going to take a little bit less energy. But you could stop at this point and put this in, not a problem. But I'm going to boil it down and reduce it by half, and it's just going to make the process a lot faster. And once you're done, don't forget that you have a whole bunch of good paste on your strainer that you can add to your boil. Not bad. When I boil down my tomatoes, I try to use a pan that has a fairly thick bottom to it, just to distribute the heat a little better. And even though I'm going to use some low heat, I'm still going to spray that just a little bit with a non-cooking spray, just to help keep it from sticking on the bottom and burning. So this is going to be a continuous project here. I'm going to go ahead and put this on the fire, and I'm going to start cooking this down. And as I continue to mash the tomatoes, I'm going to add to it, and I'm going to stir, you know, constantly, keep it on a medium-high heat until I reduce it by half, or until I reduce it more. It's all up to you. The more you reduce it, the more chance it's going to burn on the bottom. So this is just a little bit over half full. Usually when I stir this, I like using a spatula to keep the sides clean. And one of the things I think you should avoid is stirring all the way down on the bottom, because if you go all the way down to the bottom of your pan to stir, you're going to end up taking some of that spray material off, some of the no-stick spray. So I just usually will end up stirring it at the top. This is boiled down probably about 2/3, so it's nice and thick, and it's cooled down a ways. I'm just going to check back here, and it doesn't look like anything burned, so we're good to go. The nature of having a garden is things don't come on all at once, but they can kind of come on really quick. So the tomatoes, I'm going to have a constant source of tomatoes for the next several weeks. Now these are the tomatoes I picked yesterday, and these have been boiled down, and these tomatoes I picked about 5 days ago and boiled these down. I have a medium freeze dryer. These are the medium trays, and each tray holds about 1.5 quarts. And so on my first batch, I was only able to boil down 1 quart of tomatoes, but not enough to fill a tray. And this looks like it's a lot thicker than the ones I did today. So I'm going to spread these out, let these cool. Now, if you want to know what a vegetable is going to taste like freeze-dried, just go ahead and freeze it in normal freezer, thaw it out, and that's going to be the consistency of your vegetables. Frozen, sliced tomatoes do not taste really, really good. They're But however, what I'm making is tomato powder. And if you go onto the internet and look at the prices of tomato powder, it is really expensive stuff. For example, let's see, Augustin Farms has 3 pounds, 10 ounces of tomato powder for $30. See, this place has 2 pounds for $10.65, 2¼ pounds for $15, 1 pound for $13, and so tomato powder can be pretty expensive. And the great thing about having tomato powder is you can make so much things with it. So once we get done with this, I'm going to show you some of the things you can do with tomato powder, and you'll be just absolutely surprised on how versatile tomato powder is. You can make anything from tomato paste, tomato sauce, tomato juice. Tomato powder is such a basic ingredient for so many foods. Well, I won't say tomato powder is a basic ingredient, but you can reconstitute it almost at any thickness and have it be used for so many things. So we're going to go ahead and pre-freeze this, and before I do, I'm going to go ahead and weigh it, because I'm interested to see how much water I can get out of the freezing process before it goes into my freeze dryer. So tomato, 92 grams. A good thing this sauce is thick, because it'd slosh all over the place. Okay, so this tray $21.48. this tray. So 2148 plus 2035 equals, divide by 2, 2092. 2092. So I'm going to put the same amount in each tray. Just so they get done at the same time. Here's a load of tomatoes that I just pulled out of the freeze dryer. So we're just going to go here, score these edges. And how's that? Soylent red. So I'm going to take these and I'm going to put it through a food processor. I like it better when it's powdered rather than when it's in chunks. So chop this up to get it in the freeze dryer. Not the freeze dryer, food processor. There we have it. Here's some tomato powder I did earlier in the week. And we're going to go ahead and reconstitute it. Somewhere in here is my this thing. Okay, and actually, if you fill this, it still feels like flour, so this is actually still good. So what we're going to do, put some of this in here. Okay. Now, what you could do, if you wanted to, you could run this through a food processor and get this more into a powder, if you wanted to, or just leave it how it is. So if we add just, now what I'm adding is hot water. Hot water is going to reconstitute food a lot better than cold water is going to. Oh, that's a strong taste. Okay, so with that much water in it, we have tomato paste. Okay, add a little bit more water. Now we have tomato sauce. And at this point, if you want to put some Italian seasoning in this, some garlic, some onion powder, you could have spaghetti sauce, you could have pizza sauce. It's that simple. Now we put a lot more water in it. Now we have tomato juice, but we're not stopping there. Let's get some other flavors. Let's put a little bit of pineapple juice in there. And how about just a little bit of apple juice? And how about just a little bit of cranberry juice? Just a dash of parsley flake. And just a little bit of celery salt. And 1, 2, 3, 4 ice cubes. Now we have V8 splash. That's what you can do with tomato powder. It is a wonderful thing to freeze dry. It's expensive, and so you're going to be leaps and bounds ahead by having your own tomato powder. There's so many things you can make out of it. It's better than just slicing the tomato and drying it, but it is a wonderful thing to have, especially when it's chilled. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe, give us a like, and any feedback would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for your time. When you're done processing your tomatoes, the waste from your tomatoes, do not put them down. No, 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 no. Don't put them down your drain. Along with potato peels, carrot peelings, that's just going to end up plugging your drain and your pea traps. So put them out in your compost.